The first time that I watched Arrival, I was left with an empty feeling. I remember sitting alone in my room and quietly pondering what I'd just watched for roughly an hour. And once I'd gotten over the first screening, I achingly waited to continue on to the next one. This ultimately created a feeling and need to investigate and research into the making of Arrival. So in this video essay, I will aim to answer the question, how does Arrival acknowledge and counter its genre-specific conventions and structures in response to other science fiction films of the century? Spoilers for further on. The film does both, but you'll see how later on. But to arrive at a definitive conclusion, I had to then question how the formalist aspects of Arrival conform to or diverge from establishing a socio-cultural verisimilitude, and how the social aspects of Arrival conform to or diverge from science fiction's generic verisimilitude. With these questions in mind, I had to research and gain a general understanding of science fiction, time travel, and narrative. So I took some time to research and understand the opinions and academic works of Annette Kuhn in her book, Alien Zone, Cultural Theory and Contemporary Science Fiction Cinema, Jeff King and Tanya Krasinska in Science Fiction Cinema from Outer Space to Cyberspace, Melissa Lenos and Michael Ryan in An Introduction to Film Analysis, Technique and Meaning in Narrative Film, and finally, Arrival's script and panel interview conducted by Behind the Curtain with writer Eric Heiserer will also be informing the paper. Now, I had to ask myself, how is science fiction defined in cinematic literature? Author Annette Kuhn lists just some of the difficulties of defining the genre due to the amount of overlap science fiction has with its neighbouring genres like horror and fantasy. However, while Professor Jeff King agrees with Kuhn to some extent, he also believes that a science fiction film might be defined partly in terms of a semantic feature such as a setting in the future or in another galaxy or another dimension. He then goes on to announce key distinct semantic features like spaceships, scientists, cyborgs, and aliens. He furthers his statement by explaining that there might be cases in which the syntax stay the same, but some of the semantic elements change. His example being the Star Wars franchise, fusing science fiction semantics with the Western syntactics.
Hey, we don't serve their kind here.
What?
I mean, what a good film. Director Denis Villeneuve uses this information to his advantage in Arrival, reinforcing both King and Kuhn's statements. Drawing from both approaches at understanding the science fiction genre, it can be understood that science fiction is a widespread genre that does not rely on both of its syntactic and semantic traits to establish a presence. Rather, the genre can rely on either its syntactic or semantic traits at a singular time. Science fiction has pursued its long cinematic run with The Terminator, Independence Day, and Avatar.
Time's up.
More recently having a resurgence in box office success with Marvel's ostentatious Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, and DC's Zack Snyder's Justice League. Each of these films can all share a common metaphorical antagonist, invasion. But when you veer away from franchise films and look at standalone or independent science fiction films such as The Martian, High Life, and Gravity, these films take a realist approach to the visual medium, focusing on individual human issues including life, death, family, and isolation, as opposed to human life as a collective. King proposes that time travel broadens the visual scope of science fiction because it allows the stars to be shown in various costume styles and interacting with important historical events. This presence is well established in Back to the Future Part 3, allowing the Western to be momentarily revived along with saloons, bootstraps, and gun standoffs, or an Austin Powers and Goldmember shortly bringing the swinging 70s back into fashion through time traveling.
Cowboy! And now knowing I'm going to spend my future in the past sounds like a wonderful way to spend my retirement years.
In contrast, Denis Villeneuve applies his knowledge of Soviet montage theory to Arrival to create a seemingly linear flow of time. This narrative strategy conceals key narrative information allowing the audience to instinctively believe an incorrect presentation of Dr. Louisa Banks' life. A narrative constraint Arrival writer Eric Heiser identifies is the limited screen time a character is conformed to. Unable to show an entire life minute for minute in 2 or 3 hours, Heiser opted to share a long, melodramatic and emotional journey that Dr. Banks will undertake by the end of the film, and condenses that journey into just a few shots in the introductory moments of Arrival. This allows the audience to believe that this is the beginning of the linear flow of time. This choice, though, directly opposes Ryan and Lenos' statement about easy-to-follow narratives. Although it benefits the audience's viewing experience, now that we've talked about narratives, can they become political in science fiction? King supports the notion that there is potential for science fiction to represent political or challenging issues that the Earth historically, currently, or will face in the future. The most common political issue that arises in science fiction movies is the topic of war. This is evident in Independence Day, when an alien race visits Earth and shortly after begins to blow up monumental buildings such as the White House and the Empire State Building. In the same way, Predator introduces a species of alien that hunts sentient beings for sport, bringing Arnold Schwarzenegger to the front line of the human race.
One ugly motherfucker.
These narratives can also be found subdued in Arrival. The human race views the arriving alien race through an anthropomorphic lens, projecting past human characteristics onto a non-human entity, causing fear and rejection. Now, despite this, Kuhn supports the notion that aliens in science fiction can serve as hope and purpose when referring to the alien messiah, and further explains the roles as a way to resolve humanity's problems and provide resolution in a world where solution seems impossible. Arrival impressively uses both King and Kuhn's theories to misguide the audience into believing the aliens arrived to cause global unrest or harm, while the true reason But how does the mise-en-scène factor into the success of Arrival? Examining Arrival's mise-en-scène, it is evident that Denis Villeneuve diverged from a selection of semantic and syntactic traits to create an uncertain atmosphere. The cinematography is often treated as a reflection of the narrative. But how? The semi-psiographic alien language is metaphorically represented through symmetrical framing, along with deliberately placing the same shot to open and close the film. This stylistic choice gives the film an artificial atmosphere or the sense of human intervention. This is further evident as symmetrical framing can also be seen at various moments throughout various scenes in the film. Now, returning to King's explanation of syntactical traits being deliberately displaced or misused to place a character in an unfamiliar situation, Denis Villeneuve contrasts this by placing the story at the centre of a large-scale field on Earth. This contrasts other invasion films, including Independence Day, which uses towns and cities to showcase large-scale disruption. Using the scene where Dr. Banks explains her vocabulary lesson, it's apparent that during the 40-minute mark, Villeneuve establishes the central themes of Arrival. After Dr. Banks shares her vocabulary list with Colonel Weber, he questions her teaching, asking her to help him understand. This prompts Dr. Banks to explain the intricate workings of assembling a question, or a quest for information, and how that question could be misinterpreted. Dr. Banks analyses, "What is your purpose on Earth?" for Colonel Weber, which allows Dr. Banks to unfold her quest for information.
Or is their motivation so instinctive that they don't understand a why question at all?
This permits Dr. Banks to carry out her work as originally planned. Screenwriter Heiser's choice to add this scene, it was inspired by a real-life conversation between himself and his peers. He was trying to explain the difficulties of learning a new language. Referring back to King and Kuhn's research, it can be acknowledged that Villeneuve and Heiser changed certain syntactic traits of the science fiction genre to misguide the audience. The central theme of this film, communication, is exposed during this scene, revealing the film is not revolving around a hostile invasion, but how communication in the modern day is handled between humans. Dr. Banks's reason for explaining the process behind her teaching is due to Colonel Weber and his superiors, who have little to no understanding of her background or communication in general. In summary, I aim to answer the question if Arrival conformed to or countered its genre-specific conventions and structures in response to other Hollywood science fiction films made within the same decade. When researching other films such as Predator and Independence Day, I discovered that there was a selection of science fiction films from the late 90s and 80s that included war, poverty, and heroes. After researching the background of science fiction and drawing from multiple bodies of work, including that of King and Kuhn, it has been evidenced that science fiction films cover a broad range of contents and do not depend on both of its syntactic or semantic traits. With this research, it is evident that Denis Villeneuve and Eric Heiser's narrative and stylistic choices throughout the making of Arrival largely contrast the values embedded within other Hollywood science fiction films released within the same decade. Arrival contrasts other films by conveying a message of communication within war or an invasion, in response to modern science fiction films which only rarely focus on the war or the invasion.